My name is Natalie Porter, and I'm 33 years old. When my mother died, she left me to court to contest the will. His lawyer was aggressive, his evidence was manufactured, and you. Connected me. Clear from the start that she wasn't interested in playing stepmother to his daughter from a previous marriage. I saw my father every other weekend, per the custody agreement. Those visits were strained, awkward, marked by Christina's barely concealed irritation at my presence and my father's growing distance. By the time I was 16, the visits had mostly stopped. My father would cancel last minute, claim work emergencies, reschedule, and then cancel again. Eventually, we just stopped pretending. My mother never complained, never badmouthed him to me. Just quietly built a life for us in that small house, working freelance design jobs, making sure I had everything I needed. "Your father loves you," she'd say when I asked why he never called anymore. "He's just not good at showing it." But I knew better. He'd chosen his new life over his old one. Chosen Christina and later their two sons over the daughter from his first marriage. I was the inconvenient reminder of a life he wanted to forget. I left for college at 18 and barely spoke to my father for the next decade. Occasional texts on birthdays, awkward phone calls on holidays. That was the extent of our relationship. My mother, meanwhile, became my best friend. We talked every day. I visited every month. When she was diagnosed with ovarian cancer 3 years ago, I moved back home to take care of her. Those 18 months of illness were the hardest of my life. Watching her fade, lose her strength, struggle through chemo and radiation that bought us time but couldn't save her. My father visited exactly twice. Both times he stayed less than an hour. Christina never came at all. 6 months before she died, my mother called her lawyer to update her will. And Dan, right, Omagendo, was there when she signed it. "Everything goes to you, sweetheart," she said, squeezing my hand. "The house, my savings, my retirement accounts. All of it. Mom, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. You've been here. You've sacrificed your career to take care of me. Your father has his own life, his own family. This is for you." The will was simple, clear, legally sound. Everything to me. Nothing to my father, who'd abandoned her decades ago and barely acknowledged her existence since. She died on a Tuesday morning in November. I was holding her hand. My father didn't make it to the hospital in time, claimed he was in a meeting he couldn't leave. The funeral was small. My mother's friends, some distant relatives, a few colleagues from her freelance days. My father showed up with Christina and their sons, stayed for the service, and left immediately after. He didn't speak to me at all. 2 weeks later, I got a letter from his lawyer. Marcus Porter was contesting the will. He claimed his ex-wife had been mentally incompetent when she signed it, that I had unduly influenced her, that he deserved at least half the estate as her former spouse. The claims were absurd. My mother had been sharp until the very end. The will had been witnessed by 2 independent parties, and they'd been divorced for 25 years. He had no legal standing. But he had connections. And money. And apparently, no shame. His lawyer filed motion after motion. Requested medical records, deposition transcripts, financial statements. Dragged out the process for months, racking up legal bills I could barely afford. My mother's estate was worth about $400,000. The house, her retirement accounts, some savings. Not a fortune, but enough that my father wanted it. Or maybe he just wanted to punish me for being the daughter he'd abandoned who'd ended up meaning more to my mother than he did. The case finally went to court 8 months after my mother's death. The judge assigned was Richard Pemberton, a family court judge who'd been on the bench for 30 years. I learned later that he and my father played golf together. Had been friends for 2 decades. That information should have been disclosed. It wasn't. The trial started on a Monday morning. My father's lawyer, a shark named Gerald Hendricks, came out swinging. Your Honor, we're here today because Marcus Porter was systematically excluded from his former wife's end-of-life care and her estate planning. His daughter Natalie isolated Diane Porter, convinced her to cut Marcus out entirely, and took advantage of a dying woman's vulnerability. It was such a complete inversion of reality that I almost laughed. My lawyer, a patient woman named Rebecca Chen, who was working for a fraction of her usual fee because she believed in my case, stood up calmly. Your Honor, that's simply not true. Natalie Porter cared for her mother for 18 months. Marcus Porter visited twice. The will was executed 6 months before Diane's death, when she was fully competent, in the presence of witnesses and her longtime attorney. This contest is frivolous. Judge Pemberton looked bored. We'll hear the evidence. Mr. Hendricks, call your first witness. The trial was a nightmare. My father's lawyer called medical experts who claimed my mother might have been on pain medication that could have affected her judgment. Never mind that the will was signed months before the heavy medication started. They called a psychiatrist who testified that cancer patients often experience depression that can cloud decision-making. Never mind that depression doesn't equal incompetence. They even called my father, who testified with tears in his eyes about how much he'd loved Diane, how devastated he was that she'd shut him out at the end. I sat there listening to this man who'd visited his dying ex-wife twice in 18 months talk about love and loss and betrayal, and I felt my blood boil. When it was our turn, Rebecca called the witnesses who'd been present when the will was signed. My mother's attorney, who testified she was completely lucid and clear about her wishes. The 2 witnesses, neighbors who'd known my mother for years, who said she'd been sharp and certain. Rebecca called my mother's oncologist, who confirmed that 6 months before her death, her cognitive function was unimpaired. But Judge Pemberton looked skeptical through all of it. His questions to our witnesses were harsh, dismissive. His questions to my father's witnesses were gentle, almost leading. I saw what was happening. This wasn't a fair trial. This was a predetermined outcome with a performance for the record. On the 3rd day, during a recess, I was standing in the hallway outside the courtroom when I overheard Judge Pemberton and my father talking near the stairwell. I couldn't hear everything, but I heard enough. Shouldn't be a problem, Marcus. This case is weak. I'll rule in your favor by Friday. Thanks, Richard. I owe you one. Just remember that when the country club needs that renovation funding. They laughed, shook hands, went their separate ways. I stood there feeling sick. They'd rigged this. My father and the judge had planned the outcome before we'd even started. That afternoon, Rebecca rested our case. Judge Pemberton announced he'd issue a ruling by the end of the week. Though I must say, he added, looking directly at me, I find it troubling that a daughter would manipulate her dying mother into excluding her father from her will. It speaks to a certain lack of character. Rebecca objected. The judge overruled it. I'm sure Mr. Porter would have been happy with a fair division of assets. But it seems his daughter wanted everything for herself. That kind of greed is unfortunate to see in someone so young. I felt my face burn. He was editorializing, prejudging, doing exactly what judges aren't supposed to do. And there was nothing I could do about it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that overheard conversation. About how the system I'd trusted to be fair was actually rigged from the start. I thought about my mother who'd worked so hard to leave me something. Who'd been so clear about her wishes. Who would be devastated to know that the man who'd abandoned her was stealing from her grave with the help of a corrupt judge. I did something desperate. Something I'd never normally do. I hired a private investigator. I need information on Judge Richard Pemberton, specifically his relationship with Marcus Porter. Financial ties, social connections, anything that would show bias. The investigator, a retired cop named Tony Restrepo, raised an eyebrow. You know, if I find something, it could blow up the case. Judges don't like being investigated. I know. Do it anyway. Tony worked fast. By Thursday morning he had a file. Judge Pemberton and my father were more than golf buddies. They had financial entanglements. My father had invested in several of the judge's side ventures. The judge had ruled in favor of my father's company in multiple zoning disputes over the years. Most damning, my father had donated $50,000 to a country club renovation fund that Judge Pemberton was chairman of, just 3 months before my mother's death. The donation came right after her cancer diagnosis became terminal. They'd been planning this for months. Friday morning, we returned to court for the ruling. Judge Pemberton looked smug as he took the bench. I've reviewed all the evidence in this matter. While Ms. Porter clearly cared for her mother during her illness, I find compelling evidence that Diane Porter's mental state was compromised at the time she executed her will. Rebecca started to stand. Judge Pemberton waved her down. Furthermore, I find it unconscionable that Mr. Porter, who was married to the deceased for 12 years and is the father of her only child, would be completely excluded from her estate. This speaks to undue influence. He looked at me with barely concealed contempt. Ms. Porter, your behavior throughout this process has been concerning. Your refusal to negotiate, your insistence on keeping everything for yourself, suggests a level of selfishness that you're making character judgments that have nothing to do with the legal merits. I'm explaining my reasoning, counselor. As I was saying, Ms. Porter's conduct has been troubling. She isolated her mother, manipulated her during vulnerability, and is now attempting to deny her father any share of an estate he has legitimate claims to. My hands were shaking. This wasn't a ruling. It was a character assassination. Therefore, I'm ruling in favor of the contestant. The will is set aside. The estate will be divided 50-50 between Marcus Porter and Natalie Porter. Case closed. The gavel came down. Rebecca was on her feet immediately. Your Honor, we intend to appeal. You can appeal all you want, counselor. My ruling stands. He started to rise from the bench. This was it. He was going to walk away, and my mother's wishes would be destroyed, and there was nothing I could do about it. Except there was. Your Honor, I said clearly. I have new evidence. Judge Pemberton froze. What? New evidence? That I believe is relevant to this case and to your ability to rule on it fairly. His face went red. You can't introduce new evidence after closing arguments. It's not evidence about the will. It's evidence about bias. The courtroom went completely silent. My father's lawyer stood up. Your Honor, this is completely out of order. Sit down, Mr. Hendricks, Judge Pemberton snapped. He looked at me. Miss Porter, you're treading on very dangerous ground. I'm aware. May I approach? He didn't want to say yes. I could see him calculating, trying to figure out what I had, whether he could refuse without making it worse. Fine, approach. I walked to the bench. Rebecca followed, confused but supportive. When I got close enough that only the judge could hear, I leaned forward and whispered 2 words. Country club. His face drained of all color. I continued quietly, still smiling. $50,000 donated 3 months after my mother's terminal diagnosis. Multiple business investments together. Golf every Thursday, Dad. Zoning cases ruled in his favor. This isn't a trial. It's a transaction. You can't prove. I can. I have bank records, investment documents, photos, transcripts of phone calls. I have everything. And if this ruling stands, I'll be filing a judicial misconduct complaint with so much evidence that you'll be disbarred by Christmas. His hands were shaking now. Your Honor? Rebecca asked, concerned. I stepped back, speaking loud enough for the court reporter now. I'm prepared to present evidence that shows a financial and personal relationship between Judge Pemberton and my father that should have required recusal. This case should have never been heard by this judge. The courtroom erupted. My father shot to his feet. His lawyer was shouting objections. The court reporter's fingers flew across her machine. Judge Pemberton sat frozen, his face still pale. Chambers, he said finally. Everyone in my chambers now. We filed into his chambers, my father, his lawyer, me, Rebecca, and the judge. The court reporter came too, still taking down every word. Judge Pemberton sat behind his desk looking like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Ms. Porter, what exactly are you alleging? I'm alleging that you and my father have a financial relationship that created bias in this case? That you should have recused yourself? That your ruling is based not on the merits but on your friendship and business dealings with the contestant? That's slander, my father spat. Richard and I played golf. That's it. You invested in his real estate venture in 2018. He ruled in your favor on the River Street zoning dispute in 2019. You donated $50,000 to his country club renovation fund 3 months after my mother's diagnosis. Should I continue? My father's face went white. Judge Pemberton looked at him, then at me. Where did you get this information? From public records and a private investigator, all perfectly legal. Your Honor, Rebecca said carefully, if there's even an appearance of impropriety, this case needs to be reheard before a different judge. Gerald Hendricks was sweating now. Your Honor, surely there's a way to— Shut up, Gerald. Judge Pemberton rubbed his face. This is a disaster. Yes, I said calmly. It is, and it's about to get worse unless you do the right thing. He looked at me with something between hatred and fear. What do you want? I want you to reverse your ruling. Uphold my mother's will as written. And then I want you to recuse yourself from all future cases involving my father or his companies. And if I don't, then I file the complaint. With evidence. Lots of evidence. And we both know where that leads. The room was silent except for the court reporters typing. Finally, Judge Pemberton nodded. Fine. We're going back on the record. I'm reversing my ruling due to newly discovered evidence regarding the testator's mental competency. Actually, Rebecca said, you're reversing it because you should have recused yourself from the beginning, due to bias. His jaw clenched. Find out I will. Whatever. Let's just get this over with. We returned to the courtroom. Judge Pemberton looked like a man walking to his execution. After further consideration and review of additional information, I'm reversing my previous ruling. The will of Diane Porter is upheld as written. Furthermore, I'm recusing myself from this case due to a conflict of interest that should have been disclosed at the outset. Case closed. The gavel came down. My father was screaming, "You can't do this. Richard, we had a deal." Every eye in the courtroom turned to him. Judge Pemberton's face turned from pale to gray. Mr. Porter, I suggest you stop talking. Right now. But the damage was done. The court reporter had recorded every word. The few spectators in the courtroom had heard it all. Outside, my father cornered me on the courthouse steps. You just destroyed a good man's career. I exposed a corrupt judge. There's a difference. He was my friend. He was your accomplice. You tried to steal my mother's estate using your connections and his willingness to break the law. That's not friendship. That's fraud. You're just like your mother. Bitter, vindictive. I'm exactly like my mother. Strong, principled, and unwilling to let you get away with your bullshit. She worked hard for what she left me. You weren't there for any of it. You don't get to show up after she's dead and take what's hers. I was her husband, 25 years ago. You divorced her, abandoned her, and then tried to rob her grave. You're not a victim here. You're a thief. He raised his hand like he was going to hit me. Rebecca stepped between us. Porter, I wouldn't. We're on courthouse steps with cameras everywhere. He lowered his hand slowly, his face twisted with rage. Isn't over. Yes, I said tiredly, it is. Go home to your wife and your sons. Leave me alone. I walked away. Behind me I heard him yelling something else, but I didn't turn around. The aftermath was spectacular. Within a week, Judge Pemberton announced his retirement. For personal reasons. The Judicial Conduct Board opened an investigation anyway. Within a month, 3 of his previous rulings involving my father's company were being reviewed for bias. Within 3 months, Judge Pemberton was disbarred. The evidence of his financial ties to parties and cases he'd ruled on was too extensive to ignore. My father's business took a hit, too. The publicity around the corrupt judge and the challenged rulings made investors nervous. Several deals fell through. His company downsized. I felt no sympathy. I inherited my mother's estate as she'd intended. Used part of it to pay off Rebecca, who'd worked for peanuts because she believed in justice. Used more to set up a scholarship fund in my mother's name for art students. The house I kept. Moved back in. Made it mine again. 6 months after the trial, I got a letter from my half-brother, Marcus Jr., my father's oldest son with Christina. He was 18, heading to college. I wanted to apologize for my father's behavior. I didn't know about the trial until it was over, but when I found out what he tried to do, I was horrified. That's not the kind of man I want to be. I hope someday we can have a relationship that's not defined by his mistakes. I wrote back. We've been emailing since then. He's a good kid, nothing like our father. Last month was the 2-year anniversary of my mother's death. I put flowers on her grave, and told her about the trial, about standing up to Dad, about the 2 words that changed everything. You would have been proud, I said to the headstone. I didn't let him win. I didn't let him take what you worked so hard to give me. Your wishes mattered. I made sure of it. The wind picked up, rustling through the trees around the cemetery. And I swear I felt her there, just for a moment, proud and at peace. Your inheritance is not up for negotiation with people who abandoned you. Your dead loved one's wishes are not subject to revision by those who couldn't be bothered to show up while they were alive. And when the system is rigged against you, sometimes the only option is to rig it right back. If you made it this far, you understand what it's like to fight a battle against corruption and connections. Hit that subscribe button for more stories about people who refuse to be robbed by those in power. Drop a comment about a time you exposed someone's corruption. Your courage matters. Hit like sunshine. If you believe standing up to corrupt judges is not just a right, but a responsibility. And share this with someone who needs to hear that even when the system is rigged, the truth can still win. Remember, the people who think they own the system get very quiet when you prove they're criminals wearing robes. Until next time, this is Natalie, reminding you that sometimes 2 words whispered at exactly the right moment can bring down an empire built on corruption.